Most haunted places ask you to imagine the dark. Glamis asks you to count the windows. Stand outside the castle, and the story begins with something ordinary: stone, glass, and numbers. Then walk inside, and the tradition says the numbers stop behaving. The fear at Glamis is not a jump scare, it is arithmetic. We mark that carefully. This is a legend, not a proven floor plan. But the reason it survives is stranger than the claim itself. People tried to test it. Versions of the story say guests opened windows, hung sheets, towels, or handkerchiefs from them, and went outside to see which room had vanished. Not ghost hunters. Guests. That matters because Glamis is not a ruin someone found in a forest. It is a royal, lived-in Scottish castle tied to the Earls of Strathmore and Kinghorne, and to the childhood of Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. So when a place like that grows a story about a room no one can find, the question is not only whether the room exists. The question is why the idea of a hidden room felt believable enough to be inherited. And at Glamis, that hidden room is only the first door. Behind it come the card game, the family secret, the Grey Lady, and the castle that will not give up all its rooms. Glamis Castle stands in Angus. The official history of the place reaches back to the Tonnage of Glamis, granted to Sir John Lyon in the 14th century. The castle as we know it began taking shape in the 15th. That is the first thing to understand. Glamis is not frightening because it is abandoned. It is frightening because it continued. Families inherited it. Children grew up in it. Guests entered it. Rooms were opened, closed, named, restored, visited, and avoided. A ruined castle lets the imagination do too much work. Glamis does the opposite. It gives you walls, windows, corridors, a chapel, a nursery, a family line. Then it gives you a rumor that behaves like a locked door. The castle is associated with the Lyon family, later the Earls of Strathmore and Kinghorne. It is also tied to the royal family. Queen Elizabeth. The Queen Mother spent childhood time there, and Princess Margaret was born at Glamis in 1930. That makes the legend harder to brush aside. Not because royal houses prove ghost stories. They do not. But because a public, inhabited, recorded place should be easier to explain. And yet Glamis keeps returning to the same problem. A space that appears in the story, but refuses to appear on demand. The best-known version is often called The Secret of Glamis, or Connected to the Monster of Glamis. The details shift depending on who is telling it. Sometimes it is a hidden chamber, sometimes a family secret, sometimes an heir, a shame, or something the household could not name aloud. Those details must be handled carefully. A legend can become cruel when it turns an unnamed person into an object. So we do not need to pretend we know what was hidden. We look instead at the shape of the fear. The shape is simple. A great house has more rooms in memory than it admits in public. In 19th century versions of the mystery, visitors tried to solve the castle by force of daylight. Open every window you can reach, mark them, hang cloth from them, walk outside, count again. If every room has a window, every marker should show. If one window stays unmarked, then something is wrong. Either the story is wrong, or the house is holding back a space. Picture that without the ghost story music. A guest leaning out into the cold air, a sheet moving in the wind. Someone below, looking up at stone and glass, trying to make a family legend obey arithmetic. A legend is one thing. A guest leaning from a window to test it is another. The accounts do not prove a hidden room. They prove that the story had weight. Enough weight that people acted it out with their hands. That is where Glamis becomes useful for dark history. The most interesting haunting is not always the apparition. Sometimes it is the behavior around the apparition. What people avoid, what they repeat, what they test, even while laughing. At Glamis, the room comes first. The ghosts arrive later. That order matters, because a hidden room is not only architecture, it is inheritance. It asks who knew, who was told, who was old enough to hear it, who was trusted to carry it, who had to pretend nothing was there. One form of the tradition says the secret passed from Earl to heir, not to the whole family, not to the servants, not to every guest who slept under the roof, only to the next man in the line, once he was old enough to receive it. Again, we mark the boundary. That is tradition. But even as tradition, it tells us something sharp. This is a haunting built around controlled knowledge. The terror is not that the castle screams. The terror is that it whispers to one person at a time. That kind of story changes how a corridor feels. A door is no longer just a door. A window is no longer just light. A map of the house becomes a test paper. And if the secret is inherited, then every generation becomes part of the lock. The other famous Glamis legend moves through the same hidden space. Earl Beardie and the card game that would not end. This is not a subtle story. It knows exactly what it is doing. In the tradition, a lord of Glamis is desperate to keep playing cards. The Sabbath comes. The game should stop. He will not stop. Depending on the version, he curses, rages, or declares that he would play with the devil himself if no one else will join him. Something answers. Now the visual is small, but it should not be still. Cards on the table, candlelight shaking, a storm against the window, one chair occupied or maybe worse, one chair waiting. The legend says the game continues somewhere in the castle, behind a wall, inside the hidden room, out of sight, but not out of earshot. What does that story do? It gives the secret room a sound, not a shape, not a map, a sound. A locked room you can hear is worse than a locked room you can only imagine. The Beardie story turns secrecy into punishment. The room is not just hidden, it is occupied forever. The aristocratic house becomes a trap for aristocratic pride. That is why it belongs at Glamis. The legend is about a man who thinks the rules do not reach him until the room closes and the rules become eternal. Then there is Lady Janet Douglas, Lady Glamis. Here we leave the hidden room and step onto firmer historical ground. Her story is not a candlelit rumor. It is a date on the castle's own timeline. 17th of July, 1537. Janet Douglas was found guilty of treason and burned at the stake on Castle Hill in Edinburgh. Glamis was forfeited to the crown, and King James V occupied it until his death in 1542. The castle was later restored to John, 7th Lord Glamis. The official Glamis timeline is blunt about the charge: false accusations of treason and trying to poison King James V. It also gives the political reason that has followed the story ever since. Janet was the sister of Archibald Douglas, Earl of Angus, the king's despised stepfather. That is the dark history under the haunting. Not a woman drifting through a chapel first, a woman caught in the machinery of name, blood, crown, and revenge. Older accounts differ in emphasis, and some later retellings blur the language into witchcraft. We should not blur it casually. The safer record is treason, alleged conspiracy, poison, Douglas blood, royal hatred, and a death sentence carried out in Edinburgh. That is enough. It does not need embroidery. Think of the distance. Glamis in Angus, Edinburgh Castle Hill. A family seat taken by the crown. A son surviving into the restoration of a house emptied by royal occupation. This is how a castle learns to hold two kinds of memory. The official one, dates, forfeiture, restoration. The other one, a grey lady in the chapel, a sorrow attached to a place of prayer. The grey lady is tradition. We do not present her as fact, but the tradition is not floating loose. It attaches itself to a real woman, a real execution, and a castle that lost itself to the crown in the same year. That is why the story has weight. The ghost is not the evidence. The evidence is what the ghost grew from. And once you see that pattern, the Glamis legends stop looking like separate tales. The hidden room, the inherited secret, the endless card game, the grey lady. They all circle the same kind of fear, what is known publicly and what is carried privately. That is also why Glamis can be beautiful and still feel severe. Beauty does not weaken the dread, it sharpens it. A ruined wall can be dismissed as atmosphere. A cared-for castle asks a harder question. If the house is still standing, why has the story never left? By the 20th century, Glamis was not only a family seat, it was part of public royal memory. The Queen Mother knew it as a childhood place. Princess Margaret was born there. The castle opened to the public in 1950. That means visitors could walk through grandeur while carrying rumors older than their grandparents. A guidable house, a photographable house, a house with rooms you can enter, and a room the story says you cannot. Public heritage and private dread do not cancel each other. At Glamis, they rub against each other. The polished room makes the sealed room more powerful. The family line makes the inherited secret easier to imagine. The chapel makes the grey lady harder to treat as a loose ghost story. Everything here keeps turning back into a room. So what was the secret of Glamis? The honest answer is that no script should pretend to know. The monster stories are inconsistent. The secret room tradition is not proof. The window count tests are not a survey. The Beardie tale is legend. The grey lady is tradition. But certainty is not the only thing a dark history record can measure. It can measure behavior. Guests testing windows, families repeating rules, writers returning to the same room, visitors entering a royal castle and leaving with a question about the wall. That is the stronger record. Not proof that a hidden room exists, but proof that Glamis made hiddenness believable. Some places are haunted by what people say they saw. Glamis is haunted by what people cannot make the building show them. Old Man Ember verdict. Glamis belongs in the dark archive because its strongest ghost story does not begin with a ghost. It begins with a count, windows outside, rooms inside. One number refusing to meet the other. Then the castle does what old houses do best. It keeps the answer behind the wall. If there is a Scottish place you believe belongs in the next record, bring me the name. Bring me the source. Bring me the story people still test with their own hands. The archive does not need every legend to be proven. It needs the story marked honestly. This record is sealed.